3 days ago, Caitlin Clark could barely walk straight on a basketball court. Back stiffness so severe that she sat out the entire Portland game, watching from the sideline while her team played without the one player this entire league revolves around. 3 days later, she walked onto the floor at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, looked at a Golden State Valkyries team that genuinely believed they had a shot at a road win, and proceeded to dismantle them in the most complete, most explosive, most individually dominant performance of the entire 2026 WNBA season so far. 22 points, 9 assists, 4 threes, a technical foul, a flagrant foul. And a third quarter so one-sided, so utterly suffocating, that Golden State went from feeling like they had a real game on their hands to understanding they never had a chance, all within the span of about 12 minutes of basketball. The final score was Indiana 90, Golden State 82, but the score does not tell you the actual story of what happened last night. It does not tell you what the pregame press conference revealed about Clark's condition. It does not tell you what was really going on behind the scenes before tip-off, and it does not tell you what this performance means for every single team still on Indiana's schedule. So let's go through all of it, because the full story is significantly more remarkable than the highlight reel, and the highlight reel was already one of the best things you will see in women's basketball this year.
Steph, what is your reaction to getting a warning from the league as a team for the injury report involving Caitlin? Medical questions, we can defer that to the medical team. We, to my knowledge, don't have access to talk to them.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't disclose anything that's not already disclosed by our medical team, by our franchise.
Before a single minute of basketball was played last night, Stephanie White walked in front of a camera and gave one of the most telling non-answers in recent WNBA coaching history. A reporter pointed a microphone directly at her and asked the most straightforward question imaginable. How is Caitlin Clark? What can we expect from her tonight? Is she good to go? Simple question. Completely reasonable given that Clark had just missed an entire game with a back issue 3 days earlier. Any coach with a fully healthy player answers that in about 4 seconds, she's fine, she's ready, we're looking forward to getting her back out there. Done. White did not do that. What followed was a masterclass in saying absolutely nothing while technically using real words. She talked about monitoring the situation. She mentioned listening to the medical staff. She used the phrase being cautious at least once. She referenced the franchise's policy on not disclosing information beyond what the medical team had already made public. And through all of it, her body language was doing something completely different from her words. The discomfort was visible. The careful choosing of every single syllable was visible. The expression of a person who either genuinely did not have full information or absolutely did not want to share what she knew was written across her face in a way that no amount of coaching experience can fully conceal. She did not say Clark was fine. She did not say Clark was limited. She did not confirm that Clark would play at full capacity, and she did not suggest that there were any restrictions in place. She gave the answer of someone who wants to keep the injury status completely ambiguous right up until tip-off, and the delivery was so visibly uncomfortable that it immediately became the dominant conversation before the game even started. Now, there are 2 ways to read a press conference performance like that. The first is that White genuinely did not know the full picture yet. That Clark's readiness had not been fully confirmed, that the medical staff was still making a game-time decision, and that White was being honest in the only way available to her given the uncertainty. The second is that White knew exactly how Clark was, knew she was going to play, but wanted to keep Golden State's coaching staff guessing for as long as possible about what version of Clark they were going to see. Keep the opponent uncertain. Make them prepare for a potentially limited Clark, while knowing a fully operational one is about to walk through the door. Either way, the press conference moment set the tone for everything that followed. Because whatever White was uncertain about, whatever she was managing or protecting or strategically obscuring, Clark resolved the entire conversation the moment she stepped onto that floor. But to understand just how remarkable last night was,
starting a game out relatively fast, and then in the second quarter, we give up a lead. Caitlin Clark and the Fever showed out in the third quarter with a 29-17 showing. The big 3 showed up. Aliyah Boston, 20 points on 8 of 15, 16 boards, 3 blocks.
back stiffness in basketball is one of those injuries that sounds manageable from the outside and is genuinely unpredictable from the inside. It is not like a sprained ankle where you can look at the swelling and get a reasonable read on the timeline. Back issues in athletes operate on their own schedule. A player can wake up feeling completely fine and by warm-ups be unable to move laterally without pain. A player can be in genuine discomfort the night before a game and feel 90% the next morning for reasons that nobody fully understands. The back is inconsistent in a way that makes game-time decisions almost impossible to make with any real confidence until the player is actually moving on the floor. When Clark sat out the Portland game entirely, that told you the issue was real. This is not a player who misses games for comfort. This is not a player who sits out precautionary games when she is at 80% and could push through. Clark's entire competitive identity is built around playing through difficulty, competing through discomfort, and treating the floor as the place where problems get resolved rather than avoided. So when the medical staff and the coaching staff collectively decided she should not play against Portland at all, the back issue was serious enough to override all of that competitive instinct. The league noticed. Fans noticed. And the speculation that started circulating online almost immediately after the Portland DNP was announced ranged from reasonable concern to genuine worry about whether something more significant was happening. Reports were vague. Updates were minimal. The Fever's communication around the injury was tight in the way organizations communicate when they either do not want to show vulnerability or genuinely do not have clean information to share. 3 days between the Portland game and the Golden State matchup. 3 days of rest, treatment, whatever the medical staff was doing behind the scenes to get her to a place where playing was even a conversation worth having. And when White stood in front of that camera before tip-off and visibly struggled to give a clean answer about Clark's condition, it suggested that those 3 days had produced something, but maybe not the kind of full clearance that makes a coaching staff completely comfortable. What it produced, as it turned out, was Caitlin Clark walking onto the floor at Gainbridge and playing 40 minutes of basketball that would have been extraordinary even if she had been fully healthy for a month straight. Which makes what happened in that building last night something genuinely difficult to fully explain, because you cannot entirely account for it with talent alone. Talent at that level requires a functioning body to express itself through, and 3 days ago that body was in enough discomfort to sit out a professional basketball game entirely. Whatever the medical team did, whatever Clark did in those 3 days to prepare herself physically and mentally, and whatever that competitive fire produces when it has been contained and managed and held back for 72 hours, it all converged last night into something that Golden State had absolutely no answer for. And it started, as these things often do, with a quarter that gave absolutely no indication of what was coming.
This may have been the night that Caitlin Clark put the league on notice. But the Fever got the win, and Caitlin Clark, once again, pretty much put this team on her back and rode it to victory.
Indiana won the first quarter 19-18. 1 point, a margin so thin it barely qualifies as a lid. And if you had watched only the first 12 minutes of this game, you would have walked away thinking it was a genuinely competitive, evenly matched contest between two teams operating at roughly the same level. Clark came out in full read and react mode, not forcing anything, not trying to prove to the building or to the broadcast or to herself that the back was completely behind her. Just playing basketball the way she plays it when she is thinking clearly and not letting any external narrative dictate her approach. She was pushing pace in transition, but controlled pace, the kind where she is reading the defense and making the right decision rather than just attacking speed for its own sake. She was finding the correct pass. She was getting her legs under her in a way that looked completely natural for someone returning from a physical issue, which is its own kind of impressive detail when you think about it. There was no visible hesitation in her movement, no favoring of one side, no moment where she absorbed contact, and you could see the discomfort register on her face the way it does when a player is managing something significant. Whatever the back had been 3 days ago, it was not showing up in her first quarter movement patterns in any meaningful way. Golden State came out with a clear game plan and executed it with enough discipline to make the opening quarter genuinely competitive. Tiffany Hayes was active early, moving well off the ball and finding her spots in Indiana's defensive coverage. The Valkyries were moving the ball with purpose, finding gaps in Indiana's scheme, and making Clark work for every single touch rather than letting her operate in open space. Their defensive approach in the first quarter was to crowd her without fouling, to make the game physical enough that she had to earn every inch, and to avoid the kind of open court situations where her decision-making speed becomes impossible to defend. It worked in the first quarter. Clark was in the game, she was present, she was contributing, but she was not yet at the level that reshapes a basketball game in real time. The 1-point margin at the end of one told you both teams had shown up with a plan and both plans were functioning at roughly equal effectiveness. Nothing about the first quarter told you what was 15 minutes away, and that almost made the second quarter worse. This is where the game got genuinely uncomfortable for Indiana, and where the story of Clark's comeback almost became a very different kind of headline than the one it eventually turned into. Golden State outscored Indiana 26-18 in the second quarter. That is a significant swing. 8 points in a single quarter against a team with Indiana's offensive firepower is not a small margin. That is the kind of swing that tells you something structural went wrong on one side or dramatically right on the other. In Golden State's case, it was both simultaneously. Their bench came alive in a way that nobody had fully anticipated. The Valkyries' second unit ended the night with 43 bench points, a number that tells you their depth was not just a factor, but potentially the most important factor in keeping them competitive deep into a game where their starters were ultimately shooting 37% from the field. Caitlin Chen came off the bench and was converting at 64% efficiency in stretches of this second quarter, creating clean looks in Indiana's defensive rotations in ways that the Fever had no clean answer for. Tiffany Hayes kept finding her spots, kept creating separation, and kept putting pressure on Indiana's perimeter coverage in a way that the Fever's defensive scheme was not resolving. By the midpoint of the second quarter, Golden State had built an 8-point lead. Their biggest advantage of the entire game, and the building at Gainbridge, which had been buzzing since the moment Clark was announced in the starting lineup, started to go quiet in that particular way that basketball crowds go quiet when the home team is not just losing, but looking like they might not have the answer. Indiana looked disjointed in stretches of the second quarter in a way they had not looked in their recent wins. The defensive rotations were breaking down at the moments when they needed to hold together. The offense was not generating the clean looks that had defined their last two performances. Clark was on the floor and she was making the right reads. She was seeing the game correctly, but Golden State's defensive scheme in the second quarter was constructed specifically to make her work harder for every inch of space than she had been working in Indiana's recent wins. And in those stretches where Indiana needed someone to break through that defensive wall and shift the game's momentum, nobody fully did. Halftime came with Golden State in front, and the narrative of the evening had flipped almost completely. This was supposed to be the triumphant return of the league's most compelling player. The night where she walked back onto the floor after missing time and reminded everyone why this team is different when she is in it. Instead, at the halfway point, Indiana was trailing to a franchise that had entered the 2026 season as one of the roster-thin talent-developing stories of the WNBA. A team still building towards something rather than arriving at it. The questions were forming. The conversation was shifting. The entire story arc of the evening was pointing somewhere very different from where it eventually landed. And then the teams came back out for the third quarter, and Caitlin Clark had apparently decided that she had seen enough. 29-17. Indiana, third quarter, that is the number. That is the quarter that ended this game before Golden State fully understood what was happening to them, and it deserves more than just the final margin. It deserves to be walked through in real detail because what happened in those 12 minutes was not just a team going on a run. It was a single player deciding that the game was over and then proving it possession by possession until the scoreboard caught up with her decision. The moment Indiana came back out for the second half, something had visibly shifted in Clark's body language. It was subtle, but it was there if you were watching closely enough. The first quarter Clark was reading and reacting, calibrating, getting comfortable. The halftime Clark had clearly done something in that locker room, had some kind of internal reset, and the player who walked back out for the third quarter was not calibrating anymore. She was locked in at a frequency that is genuinely difficult to describe to someone who has not watched her reach it before. She attacked the very first possession of the third quarter. Not with a forced shot, not with the kind of unnecessary aggression that comes from frustration, but with the precise, calculated aggression of a player who has made a decision and is now executing it. She pushed pace immediately in transition, getting the ball up the floor before Golden State's defense could set, and converted a fast break that woke the building up in an instant. Both of Indiana's fast break points on the night came in this third quarter, at exactly the moments when Indiana needed the momentum to physically change direction. Then the threes started. Clark hit her first third quarter three with a defender's hand barely reaching her release point. The kind of shot that requires perfect mechanics and perfect confidence to even attempt, let alone convert, and she released it like it was a layup. The crowd reacted before it went in because the release told you. Golden State called a timeout almost immediately. They needed to reset their defensive scheme to talk through how they were going to contain what was now visibly happening at the other end of the floor. It did not matter. On Indiana's next meaningful possession after that timeout, Clark drove downhill with the kind of purposeful aggression that draws fouls because defenders have no clean option against it. She absorbed contact, converted at the rim, and walked to the free throw line with the calm of someone who has completely taken over the emotional frequency of a basketball game. The crowd was fully alive now. Gainbridge was making the kind of noise that you feel in your chest rather than just hear with your ears, and Clark was the reason for every decibel of it. Then came the technical foul. This is the moment that defines something specific about who Caitlin Clark is as a competitor, and it is worth spending a moment on it because the reaction tells you more than the incident itself. The exact circumstances around the technical can be debated. Whether the official's decision was the right one in real time, whether Clark was reacting to something a defender had done that the camera did not fully capture, whether the escalation to a technical was proportionate to whatever happened in that exchange. Those debates are legitimate and they will continue. What is not debatable is what Clark did the moment after that technical foul was called. She turned around. She set up the next play. She made the next correct basketball decision as though the technical had happened in a completely different building to a completely different person. That is not easy to do. That requires a specific kind of mental architecture that most competitors, even elite ones, do not fully possess. The ability to process a frustrating or unjust moment in real time and genuinely release it rather than just pretending to release it while quietly carrying it through the next 3 possessions. Clark processed it and moved on in the most literal sense, and the proof was in what she did immediately after. Then the flagrant foul. Back-to-back, 2 official actions against her within the same quarter. 2 moments where a lesser competitor emotionally exits the game, where the officiating lives in their head for the remainder of the night, where every subsequent call feels personal and every defensive touch becomes a source of frustration that bleeds into decision-making. Clark processed the flagrant the same way she processed the technical. She moved on, she kept cooking. And this is the thing that people who focus only on the frustration moments miss entirely. The fire that generated those 2 incidents is the exact same fire that generated 29 Indiana points in a single quarter. You cannot have one without the other. The competitive intensity that makes Clark occasionally cross a line with an official is the identical competitive intensity that makes her functionally unguardable when the game is on the line. There is no version where you surgically remove the edge and keep the excellence. They are the same thing expressed in different directions. While Clark was creating chaos at every level of Golden State's defensive structure, Aliyah Boston was the direct beneficiary of every attention shift Clark generated. When Golden State collapsed on Clark at the 3-point line, Boston was catching feeds in the post with a single defender who had no realistic chance of stopping her. When Golden State tried to load up in the paint to limit Clark's driving lanes, Boston was operating on the glass with nobody in position to challenge her second-chance opportunities. She converted multiple second-chance possessions in this third quarter that came directly from the gravitational pull Clark creates just by being on the floor. Clark and Boston in the third quarter was not 2 players playing well at the same time. It was a system operating at full efficiency, where Clark's presence and movement created the exact conditions that Boston's skill set is designed to exploit. Clark creating the confusion, Boston converting the results, and Golden State's coaching staff watching from the sideline without a clean answer for either of them simultaneously. Golden State scored 17 in the third quarter. 17. A team that had scored 26 in the second quarter, that had built an 8-point lead and looked like they had a real game on their hands, was reduced to 17 points when Clark decided the game belonged to Indiana. The lead flipped. The building erupted. And by the time the third quarter buzzer sounded, the result was no longer in question. The fourth quarter was always going to be a formality after that, but it told its own story. Indiana outscored Golden State 24-21 in the fourth quarter. Controlled, professional. The kind of quarter a team plays when the game is decided and the primary objective shifts from winning to protecting the margin without burning unnecessary energy or risking unnecessary injury. Clark shifted into distribution mode almost immediately in the fourth. The shot hunting stopped. The aggression level dropped to the baseline of smart, efficient basketball rather than the elevated frequency she had been operating at in the third. She was making the right passes, keeping the offense moving, and trusting her teammates to close out a game they had already won in the third quarter. The story of Indiana's fourth quarter belongs to Kelsey Mitchell, and it is a story about a specific kind of basketball intelligence that does not always show up in highlight reels but shows up very clearly in final stat lines. Mitchell finished the game 11 of 11 from the free throw line. Perfect. Not a single miss across 11 attempts while shooting 4 of 10 from the field. On a night where her jump shot was not cooperating, where the looks she was getting were not falling at the rate they normally do, Mitchell made a very clear and very deliberate decision. She stopped relying on the shot. She attacked contact instead. She drove with the specific intention of drawing fouls rather than finishing through them, and she executed that approach with enough precision to draw 5 fouls across the course of the game while converting every single free throw attempt. 19 points in a supporting role built entirely on aggression and efficiency rather than volume shooting from distance. That is a player who understands exactly what her team needs from her on a given night and adjusts her entire approach in real time to provide it. That kind of situational intelligence is what separates rotation players who contribute from rotation players who disappear when their primary skill is being taken away from them. Golden State kept competing through the fourth quarter with genuine effort. Veronica Burton and Tiffany Hayes deserve specific acknowledgement for not letting the game become the kind of blowout that makes a final score look more lopsided than the actual contest. Burton finished with 17 points by drawing 6 fouls herself and converting at the line, showing the same kind of aggression-based scoring approach that Mitchell was using on Indiana's end. Hayes gave Golden State 19 points on 7 of 13 shooting and was consistently one of the more difficult defensive problems Indiana had to manage across the entire night. But the Valkyries starters shot 37% from the field collectively. And no amount of bench production, no matter how impressive the 43 bench points looked in the final box score, covers that kind of starter inefficiency against a team with Indiana's top-end talent operating at full capacity. When your starters cannot convert at a rate that keeps pace with the opposition's best players, the game was always going to end this way. Final buzzer. Indiana 90, Golden State 82. The comeback was complete. The story had its ending. And now the stat line needed to be examined, because the numbers from Clark's night tell a story that extends well beyond what happened last night against Golden State. Bring it all the way back to where this story started, a press conference. A reporter, a microphone, a coach who could not give a straight answer about whether her best player was healthy enough to play a basketball game. Stephanie White stood in front of that camera and delivered the most uncomfortable non-answer of her coaching tenure. Her back is sore. That was the most she was willing to commit to. And in that moment, with that visibly strained delivery, she left an entire fanbase and an entire league wondering what was actually going on behind the scenes with the most watched player in women's basketball. 40 minutes later, Caitlin Clark had answered every single version of that question in the most direct and emphatic language available to a professional athlete. Not with words, not with a press conference of her own. With 22 points, 9 assists, 4 threes, a technical foul absorbed and forgotten in seconds, a flagrant foul processed and discarded just as fast, and a third quarter that turned an 8-point deficit into a lead Indiana never surrendered again. Whatever White was uncertain about before tip-off, whatever she was managing behind the scenes, whatever the medical staff was seeing that made the injury report complicated to give publicly, Clark resolved all of it by walking onto that floor and playing 40 minutes of the most dominant basketball the 2026 WNBA season has produced from a single player in a single game. And here is the thing that should genuinely concern every other team in this league. This was a comeback game. This was a player returning from a physical issue that had kept her out of the previous game entirely. This was Caitlin Clark at some percentage below 100, in a game where her coach could not even confirm publicly how ready she was. And she put up a line that would have been the game of the year in any other week of this season. What does she look like fully healthy, fully rested, and 3 games removed from any physical concern? What does she look like in a playoff environment when the stakes are the highest they have been all season and the adrenaline that she very clearly runs on is flowing at maximum? What does she look like when she does not have a back issue, and she still picks up a technical foul and a flagrant foul in the same quarter because the competitive fire burning inside her is that difficult to contain? Those questions do not have answers yet. The New York Liberty game will start to provide some of them. The rest of the regular season will add more context. But right now, sitting at 5-2 with Clark healthy, Boston dominant, and Mitchell finding value in ways that go beyond her jump shot, the Indiana Fever are sending the rest of this league a message that has been building for several weeks and just got delivered at maximum volume. She is back. Completely, fully, unmistakably back. And if the rest of the WNBA was not paying attention before last night, they certainly do not have that excuse anymore.